Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. This is Sam Livingston. I will be your guest host on today's show. For this episode, we have a special guest joining us. You've probably seen him if you've watched any of Mike Lindell's election summits. This is Professor David Clements. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on today's show. Do I call you Professor? I know that there was quite a stir up there with your job and everything there, or can I just call you David?
You can call me David. Yeah, there's a strange series of events that, so I'm kind of referred to as the professor in an honorary way, but no, I was suspended and terminated for refusing to subject my students to the jab.
Yep.
So it's more of an honorary title at this point.
All right, well, Professor, that's actually how I wanted to start the show, was maybe getting a little bit of your background and starting with your career, I believe, as a prosecutor, then you became a law professor, and then everything that happened with you losing your job there, just kind of introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure. Resume would be as follows. I clerked for a judge at a law school. I was in civil litigation for a couple of years and realized I wanted to be a trial attorney. And the only way that you're going to get courtroom experience is to really work for a district attorney's office or a public defender. So the better part of a decade, I was a prosecutor, and I rose through the ranks and eventually oversaw 6 law enforcement agencies in Lincoln County, helped secure 8 first-degree murder convictions, got an attempted murder conviction, basically every type of high-profile violent crime case I've had experience with. And at some point, I had the opportunity to teach at my alma mater, which was New Mexico State University, in the business college. And I taught a series of different legal courses: business law, consumer protection, employment law. And at some point, we all saw what occurred with November 3rd, 2020. And I applied kind of my expertise on evidence examination and started providing commentary. Little did I know that by talking about stolen and rigged elections, I would paint a huge bullseye on my back. So simultaneously, I'm commenting on elections, but at the same time, I'm also a consumer protection expert when the rollout of the experimental jab was being put out there. And I just refused to bow the knee, wear a mask. I didn't want my students to be coerced into doing that because it was a violation of federal law. It's a deceptive practice to tell someone that somehow their safety would be mitigated if they put on a mask that clearly was not designed to prevent transmission. And so it was on those two very, very toxic, controversial topics that I found myself in the hot seat. And the evolution of my experience has really just shifted based on what I feel like the American people needs to hear. So I've done commentary. I've done interviews on podcasts, much like your own show. I've helped oversee audits and canvasses in my own home state and across the country. And right now I basically travel from state to state to educate people on their elections. And then as far as other issues that I'm dealing with, is as soon as I started talking about elections, I started having a series of political operatives file complaints to strip me of my law license. And so I've had to weather 5 complaints, 5 investigations, and I'm still standing strong, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what the cost have been to stand up and talk about these subjects.
Yeah, I was going to go through that a little bit, just some of the media smears. I wanted to read through this. The Washington Post, this was last year, you probably saw this, but they wrote a 3,200 word article just about you. They call you the self-appointed election fraud evangelist. This was another quote. It says, a recent report from congressional Democrats on election misinformation highlighted David Clements, that's you, activities and concluded that the greatest current threat to democratic legitimacy now comes from lies by domestic actors who seek to convince Americans that their election systems are fraudulent, corrupt, or insecure. The greatest current threat would be a fellow like you who is an attorney, a professor, and is raising the alarm really about what 74, 80 million Americans are concerned about. NPR, they had similar articles about you. One of them was talking about how when you would go on these speaking tours, the Secretary of State would actually up the security, whatever that means, as if you were this domestic terrorist visiting their state. How do you deal with stuff like that? I mean, you mentioned getting fired from your job. I mean, do you have a lot of people who will still talk to you from the university, or you've pretty much had to get a completely new friend group?
Well, there's a couple things there. Number one, there's no self-appointment. I go to these, I get requested to show up and present evidence, and it's open to anyone. And so if there wasn't a demand and people weren't showing up by the hundreds and sometimes even larger numbers, I wouldn't have the traction that I've had. But the reality is I've traveled to 47 states because I've been invited to share my expertise. And it's not just the Washington Post. There was a professor in some radical left school in California that said that my efforts presented an existential threat to democracy. I think the longest article out of all of them that even outstripped the Washington Post was done by Reuters. And they had a 9-person hit team that followed me from state to state. And both of those stories, read like obituaries. And the fact of the matter is they don't quite know what to do with me because they can't ignore my credentials. I mean, the fact of the matter is I've got high profile convictions on top level cases that have been upheld by the state Supreme Court of New Mexico. Number two, they can't say that I'm some hack that got lucky because I was, out of the 3 years I was a law professor, I was nominated for my college's most prestigious award and won it the last year just before I was suspended. Actually, the day before I was suspended. So I've got the credentials. And so what they do is they create a false narrative that victimizes the very people that are responsible for driving our election confidence into the ground. And the sad state of affairs is this: I've received death threats. My wife has received death threats. We've been marginalized. I've been terminated. It seems like the only people that don't have any accountability are the secretaries of state. In my state, we had the state auditor named Brian Colon. He tried to shut down an audit that we did when we're trying to get to the bottom of fraud, waste, and abuse. And there's actually a story that's going to be coming out soon where the same auditor that attacked us over our audit in Otero County has about $50,000 worth of illegal contributions that there's ethics complaints filed against him. So the people that we're exposing are dirty, filthy, corrupt politicians. And until I started talking about 2020, I had an unblemished, distinguished career. In fact, in 2016, I was the prosecutor of the year for the 12th Judicial District. So on paper, I was like the guy until I talked about these issues. So they're scared, they're nervous. They should be, because the truth is on our side.
Now, I think I overheard this at the Lindell event. You said something about you ran for the U.S. Senate. Was that 2014? You did that, and there was something about maybe some fraud in that election. Maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, there's massive fraud even within the GOP. And so I went into that election as just kind of, I didn't have any concerns about the election system. I didn't know about the election system. But 2014 was the first year that Dominion was brought into New Mexico. And I saw certain deviations where I was up 14,000 votes in a U.S. Senate race to see that lead disappear. And the reasons provided were, well, we haven't counted the mail-in ballots yet. Now that they've come in, that's the reason why you're behind. And at the time, it was too abstract. I couldn't understand, like, how is that possible? How could I have such a sizable lead, but when the mail-in ballots come in, there's such a disproportionate vote for my opposition instead of me? You'd think that if it's a random sample, you'd more or less have some consistency between mail-in votes and in-person votes. But it went over my head at the time. All that to say, I experienced fraud in the lead up to the primary election. I exposed it. In fact, there was a campaign manager for my opponent that hacked my campaign email, and we were able to do through forensics a tracking hash that tied the hack to him. I got sued for exposing this person for defamation, even though I told the truth. And they tried to tie me up in the court system for a couple of years, to where I eventually prevailed. I got a settlement and a dismissal of their case with prejudice. And I can tell you now, until I'm blue in the face, that yes, I was hacked. So that should tell you that I was successful in defending myself. And so, suffice to say, at the time, I had no idea why, providentially, I felt called to run. And all I did was see corruption after corruption after corruption. And at the time, it was abstract, but I personally experienced it. But the silver lining is, this was when 2020 came around. I had already processed it. I'm like, okay, well, now I'm being faced with more evidence of fraud, machine subversion, frivolous lawsuits. So it was as if God used that as a training ground to put me through the fire. So when 2020 happened, I was oddly enough at peace with just about everything I was seeing. Everything slowed down for me.
Wow, that's incredible. So is New Mexico, is that similar to a state like California, where Democrats get in control, the rules change, and by that point, sadly, it's like a lost cause in many ways?
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to say that their state is the worst, but what I'll tell you is Democrats in our state have always controlled the Senate. There's never been a time where Republicans have controlled the Senate. The House, they've only controlled it for 2 years out of 85 years. So right now, the current landscape is the governor, who just issued an executive order trying to disarm people in the city of Albuquerque, which was struck down. She's a Democrat. The attorney general is a Democrat. The SOS is a Democrat. The auditor is a Democrat. The entire Supreme Court, all positions are Democrats. So when we talk about election subversion, every single position, I think of New Mexico as the testing lab to try out all of the tricks that you're seeing across the country. And I'm living in a leftist hellhole. I love the state. I love how beautiful it is, but it is really ground zero for corruption that you wouldn't believe.
It's funny that you would term it that way, because I had a similar thought when Governor Grisham passed that, I shouldn't say passed, created that edict about the concealed carry. I thought, well, why would they be trying that in New Mexico? And it's as if, well, let's just try it here first. It's not a huge state. Let's see what the pushback is like. And then, yeah, like you say there, they try it even with election laws, and then they just solidify control.
Yeah, I agree.
You, I think in one of your videos, I can't remember, there's been 2 or 3 of those Lindell events. It might have been the most recent. Did you say that you guys are working on a movie about election fraud? I know you played a 6 or 7 minute clip there.
Yeah, there was an extended trailer for a documentary called Let My People Go. If you go on Rumble, you can just put in Let My People Go trailer and watch it. Yeah, but this basically captures much of my work and the work of other experts of the past 3 years, where we're really trying to have the definitive piece of all the lies and myths that have been told to us about our elections, and the J6ers. It's actually a piece that really signals that there's slavery happening on 2 levels. We've got real God-fearing, wonderful patriots that are in cages today in the DC gulag, and they're there because of a stolen election. And then there's another form of slavery, which is the use of these proprietary black boxes that you can't meaningfully audit, that keep us enslaved because it takes from us our most valuable property interest, which is our vote, and our vote is our voices. So the film tries to tackle both areas to expose the lies and the myths, in the hopes that we can improve the terrain over the next calendar year before that consequential general election in 2024.
You mentioned proprietary there. That's actually one of my questions later on. Talking about these, you hit a lot, obviously, on election machines themselves. In your research, I think just trying to, as someone who is not involved in elections or the technology there, I think learning that Dominion's machines, they can be hooked up to the internet. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was when they would try to audit these machines, a lot of judges obviously would knock things down for lack of standing, which is just they're being spineless. The other one was the components of the machines are proprietary, as in Dominion is assembling these machines, but they're not actually building the hardware. The hardware is coming from China. So is that your experience looking into these companies as well? They've built these machines, but they don't even really know what's in them as well?
Well, they know, and because they are designed to facilitate fraud. No one makes a device or a piece of equipment this prone to manipulation. And look no further than what happened in Maricopa during the last election. The products are defective.
Yep.
So even, when you've got rejection rates of ballots that exceed 50%, you tell me if that product's working. But they're hiding behind proprietary intellectual property grounds. And when you think about it, it's pretty absurd. So they've got the software design of the software that's on the machines. And I really don't get too caught up on whether it's ES&S, Dominion, Hart, InterCivic. Those are just candy wrappers. They got a logo. They're vessels that allow you to run the same software design. And the software design for all of the vendors is essentially the same. And once you've seen how easy it is to subvert that software, it makes you wonder why we use the machines at all. So as someone that used to teach intellectual property, I can tell you this: usually the things that are afforded proprietary protection are things that are unique. And so I ask people, can you tell me what is so proprietary about addition? Because a tabulator, if it's doing its job, is just tabulating, it's adding votes. And the answer to that is there's nothing proprietary about it, but there is a code that is likely being used to subvert that they don't want you to know about. And so the way that you usually settle issues of intellectual property is you have an in-camera hearing. It's a private hearing before a judge. Each side puts out their experts. Everything's sealed. And you test the equipment to see if it facilitates fraud or not. And I think it's curious that in none of the litigation involving Dominion has anyone had the courage to submit their products to an in-camera hearing and inspection. And the reason why, I could tell you why, is that if a judge makes a determination that the machines do in fact facilitate fraud, the non-disclosure agreements that would protect the parties would go out the window, because no NDA can protect a scheme that is fraudulent. The court won't allow it. So I think it's curious that people will sue Fox News for billions of dollars, or Mike Lindell for $1.3 billion, but at no point will Dominion actually put up their product to convincingly disprove anyone's claims that their machines can be subverted.
So does that come up? Like, what does it take to get to that stage? Because prior to 2020, I would say Democrats were the big ones in pushing the vulnerability of election machines. Carolyn Mahoney had all of those reports. There was Alex Halderman from University of Michigan. They had the hackathon or whatever, where they brought all of these machines in there. There's the Kill Chain documentary. I can't remember that man's name, the Norwegian guy. Where all of those vulnerabilities are there. And why is it so hard when, like you said in your first Lindell event, there's the scene of the crime here, and there's all of these potential ways for that to happened, and a judge is it really just a judge lacking the courage to do it? Is that what it's coming down to in most of these cases?
It really does come down to corruption. And you have to understand that many of these judges, especially the state judges that aren't appointed, they're on the ballots for retention elections. So there's a conflict of interest for any sitting legislator or sitting judge that's ever been on a ballot to investigate the very apparatus that let them through. Not saying that all of them are malicious actors, but there is a conflict of interest for all of them. And I think they're acting accordingly. The other thing is that the doctrine of standing is fundamentally misunderstood. And we have to have a case of first impression that deals with the landscape that we're in now. And what I mean by that is that typically, in order for a court to look at the merits, they have to first determine whether or not the controversy before it is justiciable, meaning that they can do something, that they're the appropriate vehicle to resolve whatever the controversy is. And usually what happens, as long as there's a political remedy, the courts won't take the case. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. What I can tell you is that there's a spectrum. And I think there are definitely judges that are corrupt, that are willfully subverting the will of the American people and not letting due process play out. There's a couple concrete examples of that. There were a couple of cases filed, one in Arizona before Judge Humatua, who was a Barack Obama appointee. It was a 400-plus page complaint with exhibits, attachments, expert reports, and she set that hearing for 1 hour. Wow. So, how could you read that complaint, let alone have evidentiary testimony? And the fact of the matter is they didn't have real testimony. I actually checked the court logs. So these people are subverting the spirit and intent of the law on any election outcome determinative case. So these are the cases that would have just made an impact on whether or not Joe Biden was inaugurated or not. And then there's a series of cases that deal with Band-Aid fixes or Band-Aid issues with fraud. And uniformly, those cases will be taken up. In fact, out of the 92 cases that were filed by either the RNC, Trump, or the GOP, out of those 92, only 30 were set for merits hearings. And out of the 30, they prevailed in 22 out of the 30 cases, meaning that they won the majority of the cases that were heard on the merits. So we've got false narratives presented by the 65 Project that no cases are going anywhere. No, when you set them and you hear them, we win. But the curious thing is that no one is setting the real important cases on whether we've got the right person there or not. Those are the ones that have been just bludgeoned to death. So you've got the standing issue, number one. You've got a corruption issue. You've got a courage issue, and then there was something that you brought up that I might have forgotten, but you brought up something with respect to, what is it? It'll come back to me, but there's something else that you mentioned, but I've been rambling on.
Oh, that's all right. I was thinking that, as you said there, what you mentioned earlier, where this is when it cut off, that the judges, they won't hear a case if there's a way to remedy it politically. It seems like following that election, there's really nothing you can do that didn't lead to January 6th and asking Pence to say, hey, turn this back so at least the American public can hear the evidence. Because there really wasn't, like you said there, some people are given an hour or 2 hours in the afternoon. You've got Rudy Giuliani driving all over the country trying to attend these hearings. What is the way to what's the recourse or the way to remedy this, even especially at this point now where, like we see in Georgia, it's illegal now to really challenge an election?
Well, so one of the things that you have to understand is that just because something's legal doesn't make it moral. Mm-hmm. Just because something's moral doesn't make it legal. And so you have to understand that the election code writ large is not written by the legislature. It's written by special interest groups, i.e. the vendors. And the vendors write the code in such a way that it inoculates them from any real accountability. And they will find sponsors. They'll find legislators that they will wine and dine, and they will sponsor it. And that's how the code came to be. So many of the legal challenges that we're having such a mind-numbing ability to navigate, it's no small wonder, because it's Dominion, it's ES&S that had a hand in drafting the code. So people have to kind of apprise themselves of how the law came to be that favors the vendors, number one. And number two, we got to stop conceding certain terrain. I'm all for going and filing challenges, even in places where maybe the success rate is low, as long as we can scale and showcase the corruption. So Carrie Lake is a perfect example. No one that's watching the trials that she's brought over the past 2 years is left with thinking that there's nothing there. They're left with an abiding conviction that the election was stolen, even though she's not getting real justice in a court of law. Well, don't sell yourself short. You know, when Joe Rogan and people go on his show saying, oh yeah, Carrie Lake won, that election was stolen, that's the type of seeds that have to be planted, where people start to lose confidence in these institutions that have sold us out. And so before you can have real meaningful reform within the institutions themselves, you have to clean them up and expose the corruption. So why would we ever expect a corrupt actor to all of a sudden do the right thing? And so there's a major purging going on, and that's really evidenced by the Rasmussen polls that keep showing up. And the Rasmussen polls show that 80% of the Republican Party thinks that 2020 was rigged. 64% of independents thinks that 2020 was rigged. 45% of Democrats thinks that election was rigged. You add it up, you've got a 62 to 68% metric of all voters that believe our elections are garbage. And that was earned by the advocacy of people like myself, not mainstream media, not Conservative Inc., not the Republican Party. This has been done by truth-seeking, regular, everyday people that said, look, I'm going to fight for my voice. I'm going to fight for my vote. And we're going to go wherever we can to just pound the desk. And in my humble opinion, the best way to do that is in front of local commissioners at the county level, to people that administer your elections locally and certify your local election results. You have to hold them accountable. And if you can save your own county, you've got a shot moving forward. But if you think that the legislature or a judge is going to save us, I've got news for you. It's just not going to happen.
So it's a grassroots movement. I think what you were saying there about how people notice this. That's why you were saying when you travel, it's because there's a market for people that want to hear this. I just think it's so insulting when the regime will say things like, well, Donald Trump or David Clements is out there sowing confusion and making people doubt the election system. Well, I'm not involved in that, and I watched what happened on election night, and I have questions that they never answered. They just said, trust us. And there are tens of millions of people out there where we don't get an explanation. It's just Chris Krebs coming out and saying it was perfect. How dare you challenge us? But then someone like yourself comes around and tries to explain it logically, and then you're kind of pinpointed as someone that, well, you're taking advantage of all the plebs or telling them what to think, when no, this is really, it's the silent majority that thinks this way.
Yeah, and I'm not on the fringe. And here's the deal. I don't plant seeds of confusion. I provide clarity. I understand these systems inside and out. It wasn't always the case, but I've investigated this much like I would. And if I was wrong, I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of interviews, hours long. I've got hundreds and hundreds of evidentiary presentations that are hours long. There are so many ways to substantively rebuke me if you're an expert, if I'm wrong. In fact, I just pulled this report. This is an audit report that we helped compile. This one's over 500 pages. It's footnoted. It's got figures. It's got all of our work. And not one expert on the left has been willing to go toe-to-toe. They would rather ignore this because they don't want to draw attention to the fact that, yes, these systems are designed to facilitate the selection of certain candidates over others. Mm-hmm. And so if I was such a, obscure pseudo academic, you'd think that someone would take me up in a heartbeat to debate me. And they run from the hill. So we dominate the court of public opinion. And you'll notice that the other side doesn't really have experts. You actually mentioned this, and now I've reminded of the point I wanted to make of Halderman and Harry Hursty and Philip Stark. All of these radical leftist experts were all on the scene warning about the vulnerabilities of these systems when Trump was in office. And my hypothesis for that is that they were worried that he would use the military to seize the machines in the wake of rampant fraud. And he had the legal authority to do so under an executive order issued in 2018. And so what they were doing is they set up a narrative that if he were to do that, they could blame him for manipulating election results. And that's why you had all of these reports out there. But curiously enough, and I'm glad that you drew attention to this, is as soon as Biden was inaugurated and Trump did not take the National Guard to seize these machines, they dropped it all. It's like they put Halderman in a closet. They put Stark in a closet. You don't hear from any of their experts because they are politically motivated and extremely biased. So these bad actors have contingency plans for everything. And Trump did not act in a way that they thought he would. So they shelved all of the discussion of the machines. And now they're accusing people like myself who are bringing up the same vulnerabilities that Halverman did as election deniers.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, so this story comes out a couple weeks ago in Muskegon, Michigan, that the FBI, bar all of them, essentially just kind of buried this pretty substantial investigation there by local police. We've got to get the local people to do it, where these people are hired to go out and register people to vote. They're hired, well, not register them to vote, to collect their forms and register them themselves. Who knows, collecting their ballots. But it seems like this organization is huge. Is there this stage where a lot of these, lower level people, maybe they're just applying for a job and the higher ups say, well, these are actually the rules, but they're misleading them, like in Wisconsin, I think it was in Madison County, where the Secretary of State was telling election workers the wrong rules. And then those election workers are telling the people, yeah, use the drop boxes, which were illegal. So how, I want to get to this in a little bit, kind of remedying or putting them together. You've got the ballot fraud on one hand, and then we need to square that with using the machines at the same time. Like, how big do you think this is?
Oh, it's huge. When you look at Muskegon in particular, massive fraud operation that was there, that was documented and really was exposed years later. But it's curious that this fraudulent operation was under the nose of a Democrat prosecutor by the name of, or district attorney by the name of DJ Hilson. Now, if you've been keeping up with the news, DJ Hilson had an investigation farmed to him from their corrupt attorney general, Dana Nessel, to go investigate the investigators that revealed massive fraud throughout Michigan. And so I happen to represent, as an attorney, one of those experts by the name of Jeffrey Lenberg. He's a nation state vulnerability expert. He was asked by the townships to show up and investigate the machines because they saw 7,000 votes being flipped from Trump to Biden. And so he was able to analyze that at the request of local officials that own the equipment. And so what they've done is they've persecuted the attorneys, first and foremost, Matthew DePerno and Stephanie Lambert, and they were trying to get the experts to turn state witness and testify against the attorneys. So I was actually in DJ Hilson's office about 2 months ago, and I basically told him, hey, keep your immunity deal. My client's not going to testify against anyone. Why aren't you looking at the massive fraud? And this was before the bombshell report that you just mentioned showed that Muskegon is another ground zero operation for massive fraud. So the corruption is so pervasive. So I just want to touch on that with Muskegon because I do have direct personal knowledge on some of the machinations that are going on there. But then you just asked the other question of how much of this is ballot harvesting, how much of this is the machines. And I look at this as a fully integrated system. They work in concert. But I'm a firm believer that if you get rid of the machines, all of the other stuff with the ballot harvesting implodes. And so from a standpoint of primacy or triage, if we're in an emergency room, you've got to deal with the machines because it's the machines that give you the analytics to model elections ahead of time and to know how many ballots you need to stuff in the ballot box. So for instance, e-poll books, they look a lot like this iPad. In states that have voting convenience centers, those poll books have to be networked and hooked up to the internet according to state law, whether it's Michigan, anywhere else. So now we've got a machine that's hooked up to the internet and it's providing real-time analytics as to who has shown up. But more importantly, it creates a list as to who has not shown up, which answers the question of 2,000 mules. How did these mules know to go to a particular precinct, to a particular drop box with a particular set number of candidates filled out for the person they wanted to win? It's the machines that inform that decision making. So you don't separate the two. And then I'll just say this, that the machines provide bad actors with operational control from before an election, during election, and after election. That basically gives them carte blanche to overwrite election results, inflate voter rolls, and I can get down into the weeds on specific points of vulnerability. But yeah, if you're serious about reforming and bringing trust back to the elections, if people are silent on the machines, they don't know what they're talking about. It is the most important issue that has to be resolved. And it really, if you're serious about ballot harvesting, you have to understand how the machines interplay with that scheme.
So would you say that as something like the machines set the bar, but then you need a paper trail, the ballots can be filled in afterwards to kind of validate, quote unquote, what the machines say?
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff is happening in microseconds. So to really understand the landscape of elections, you have to understand about, okay, what are the avenues for access and opportunity to subvert the elections? Number one, you need to understand that all 50 states have agreements between the Secretary of State and this group called Center for Internet Security. It sounds governmental, but it's not. It's a private organization that works at the behest of the Department of Homeland Security. And they have deployed this thing called an Albert sensor behind the firewalls of every single election central office, and allows them to monitor all aspects of elections real time. So Michigan has an agreement, New Mexico has an agreement, Texas has an agreement. And so now you've got an ability to monitor things, and it's in the hands of the Department of Homeland Security, which thinks that we're domestic terrorists for even talking about elections. So you got to know that, number one. But it begs the question, if you can monitor things, can you now change the data? And the answer to that is yes. Across the country, we're finding third-party corporate vendors that have all-inclusive internet-connected software that touches on every aspect of the elections. The big name ones are NoInk, BPro, VR Systems, 10X, and they have the ability to overwrite data. They have the ability to inflate voter rolls. They have the ability to mess with election night reporting. And the question is, do we have concrete evidence of automation? And the answer to that is yes. We're seeing impossible spikes in voter registrations across the country. We're seeing processes that allow the Secretary of State to run election results through this software, and it overwrites the data, and they basically kick that back down to the local commissioners to certify, which is illegal. So we're seeing so much fraud, it's hard to keep up with. But you've got the tools in place to monitor and change, which would not be possible if things weren't hooked to the internet, number one. And the last thing is you have to have connective tissue. You have to be able to connect into the local precincts, the e-poll books and tabulators across the country. And the question is, does that exist? And the answer is yes. There's an entity known as FirstNet, which basically has the coverage of the 5G network. And we've been pulling contracts from across the country that shows, yes, we've got connection points that you wouldn't believe. So we've been lied to on so many levels about how expansive this network is, that we're really just watching theater at this point.
Maybe I could go ahead and play this clip. This is from the recent Lindell event in Springfield, and you're explaining the batch sets. And I just have a few questions about that, but we can play clip 2 for our viewers.
This is the Trump to Biden ratio when we're looking at election night in Georgia. You've got interval reports, and what you need to know here is that set point means victory for Biden. If Trump gets above it, he wins. But if it comes back to that set point, he loses. So we see Biden vote injections, and then we see an impossible arrangement of data throughout election night. So what's going on right here is to maintain this set point, just like you want to maintain that 70 degrees in your home, they have to have 50-50 ratios. So when you have a batch of votes that come in from election night reporting, guess what the ratio was? 50-50. But we got to keep it there. We got to maintain the set point. So the next batch of votes comes in, it's 50-50, 50-50, 50-50. How many batch sets in a row do you think happened in Georgia? 55 batch sets in a row at 50-50 to maintain that flat line to bring it in. Wow. But over time, you need to drive down with greater precision to make sure that you definitely get the set point. And so what happens is over time, we saw over 90 batch sets of votes where Trump got 49.9% versus 50.1% from Biden.
Wow.
In a row, over 90 reports from this sidle data that we were able to monitor in a row. Folks, you can't out-cheat or out-vote the machines. It's gonna find its set point.
So my interpretation of that, and I think the way you explain that is great. Like it's got to accelerate to this point, but then you've got to really be careful because you can't go over the amount of registered voters. When you're talking about these 50-50 batch sets, now are those actual, a grouping of ballot, let's say a box of ballots is counted and it's half and half, or at that moment there's a reporting of votes and it's as 50-50, and then afterwards they have to find the ballots to try to make that match?
Okay, so there's a lot there, so I'll do my best to explain why I focused on Georgia, because a lot of people are saying, well, David, all kinds of data is coming in at different times. You got third parties involved, and of course it's not going to be perfectly accurate. It's projection. That's how we were initially gaslit. Well, we found out that Seidel has a direct contractual relationship, and I want to say at least 9 states where the election officials give them raw data. And so once that raw data is received at certain points, those are the interval reports. Seidel will then relay it to Edison, and that's what you see on TV. And we confirm that Edison and Seidel data is the same. So what you would expect is that would look like natural data, and it would be raw data. And in elections, all you would expect to see is votes added, or they stay the same. And each interval report, you'd see more votes added. Well, when you actually map out the real-time interval reports, you see oscillation and you see votes being added and deleted as if it's a math problem trying to solve itself. So that does not jive with what we know about how that data is being received. The reason why we brought up the Trump to Biden ratio that you saw at the Lindell event is that that's evidence of a PID control, proportionate integral derivative function. And there's no reason why you should see something that looks like a thermostat readout, like with your air condition. So the way that we explained it is that if it's 40 degrees and you want to warm your house to 70, you crank the furnace on and it'll give you max power until it reaches that set point. And once it's there, it'll come on and off and maintain that set point to keep it at an even 70 degrees. Well, we're seeing that same phenomena when you look at the Trump to Biden ratio. And so the batch sets that are coming in, you would never expect to see a perfect 50-50 ratio, maybe once, but maybe the next batch set that comes in is, 60-40 or 63, whatever. The fact that we're seeing 56 batch sets in a row of 50-50 is impossible. And when you drive down with greater precision and really eke out that set point arrival with the 50.1 to 49.9 ratio that we saw in over 90 batch sets in a row, that is also impossible. And so I focused on Georgia because we know for a fact in Georgia, Seidel has an agreement with Georgia officials to receive the raw data. So there's no projections. You should not see that. So no matter how you shake it up, it's an impossible arrangement of votes being really presented in such a way to maintain a set point. I don't think we're tethered to reality at that point. It's the machines want to keep the programming there. And so to your question, there's got to be a time in which ballots arrive to match what's being done in the machine. And there was an opportunity to do that in Fulton County in particular. If you recall, election workers or poll observers were sent home under the pretext of a water main break, which gave corrupt election officials hours in the dark of night to start feeding the real paper ballots to match what's going on. So how exactly that takes place, there's some question marks. Obviously, you're not going to get a straight answer from Ruby Freeman or Shay Moss and the people like that. But what you saw were opportunities for ballots to come in and to have that paper trail match what was going on in the machines. And it wasn't just Georgia. We saw it in Wayne County, where the vans came up at 3:30 in the morning after the polls had closed. We saw it in Pennsylvania when a guy drove from Bethpage, New York, delivering hundreds of thousands of pre-filled out ballots. So, my point is this: is that you do the digital manipulation where you can, and sometimes you do it in tandem with the metrics that you've got during early voting, and you have the votes and the ballots run through. But when things start to break down on election night, what are we told now? Hey guys, don't worry about, you're not going to get results tonight. And what they do is they tuck things away behind closed doors. And in Arizona, there was a 10-day period where we're waiting for the victor between Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs. And what ballots just kept showing up that happened to match what they did in the machines. So I think the scheme is very comprehensive, but right now all of the talking points are early voting is a good thing. It's a terrible thing. Yep. And don't expect election results on election night. And that allows them flexibility to find ballots to match what they're doing into manipulation.
I think that's one of the things that's especially frustrating when you look at, Western European nations won't do mail-in balloting, but you look at going in to vote, a person has to go to a polling center. That ballot, like we saw in Maricopa, if there's a problem, you can't walk out of the building with that ballot. It's there, it stays there. When you do the mail-in, Maricopa, for example, that ballot goes through 10 more different steps where there's no accountability for how it's being handled. And at any point, like it could happen at Runbeck or it could happen at one of these collection facilities where they're just being thrown in. The signature verification, I'll play a clip that we made. This is about what happened in Milwaukee. But especially there, it was the ballots, the envelopes, the signatures are verified at a different location. Then they're driven to the counting facility. So there's all of these points where just normal observers would be able to look and say, hey, that's crazy. There's so many open doors here for fraud. And then like you said at the first Lindell event, when you see it actually happen, well, you've got to start looking into it. This is a clip that we put together. This was right after the election. This is Milwaukee. This is about a minute and a half. But the time codes, I think, kind of just attest to everything you're saying. And of course, it happens in swing states. It happens in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Go ahead and play clip 4.
The city of Milwaukee says that they will have all of their votes counted by 3 a.m.
I think you're going to talk about Milwaukee County. That would be my guess. The difference 4 years ago was 162,000, and we haven't moved a ton here. Statewide, the difference is about 100,000, 110,000. What do you see there?
I got 107,000. Try and simplify it. Milwaukee, what the New York Times is saying is 41% of the estimated vote is in. And right now they've got about 220 some odd thousand votes in.
Before that we were going to hear from the Milwaukee that they were going to do a huge dump of vote from Milwaukee at 3 a.m. Eastern time. They've now pushed it back to 5 a.m.
But why does it take so long, Arnon? You've got 70% of the vote in some of these cases, and they've been counting, all of these ballots all day long. Why does it take so long?
An election today, right? They knew it was coming.
They knew it was coming. I think nobody anticipated the humongous turnout we've seen today.
Joe Biden in Milwaukee County, as of now, he's got 60% of the votes cast there. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was up by 10 points more. Is there 10% more votes here for Joe Biden? There might be. But at the moment, he is underperforming Hillary Clinton from Milwaukee County, which...
All right now, again, the president leads by just about 100,000 votes and about 4 percentage points in Wisconsin. But again, still too close to call.
We mentioned before we started the show at 5 a.m. we're going to get a big ballot dump at 5 a.m. Did we get it? Because it looks like that for the first time, percentage points ahead, 49.4 to 49.1. He takes his first lead. Does Joe Biden?
I think one of the frustrating things about that clip is just how much the election expert there was just laughing. Like, what are they doing? Why are they going to sleep? We've never seen anything like that. And if you ask a question about it, you're fomenting insurrection, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it really, what you just played really complements my explanation of what's going on. This isn't increased voter turnout. And this is one of the things that your listeners need to understand. This is not about shoe leather, get out the vote. This is where Scott Presler is absolutely wrong about registration efforts and getting out the vote and looking at enthusiasm. You can't outvote or register software programs that are inflating things artificially. This is about getting out, for Democrats or even the Uniparty, this is about getting out ballots. Ballots aren't people. And so you can create ballots out of thin air. You can suspend them within the system. And so what they're doing is they're getting an accounting of who has shown up, and now they have the number that they need to basically create in order to make sure that certain people win. And so when they talk about, well, we're expecting another ballot dump at 5 a.m. in the morning, I'm automatically drawn to the footage of vans showing up after the polls have closed. And I'm reminded of the truck driver from Bethpage, New York, who saw pre-filled out ballots that favored one candidate over the other, and there were over 200,000 ballots. So once you have the metrics, you've got all these NGOs that are out there receiving the data, and they know how to basically fill in the gaps. And so this is not a ballot harvesting operation that you can compete with if you want to abide by the law. The way that the Democrats are winning is that they are flagrantly ignoring the laws, right? There's no reason why ballots filled out in New York should have found their way in Pennsylvania, but that happened. There's no reason why you had 4 dollies of ballots in Detroit get off and be processed in the dark of night, but it happened. There's no reason why people should have been sent home in Fulton County, to where if you add it up, there's over 18,000 votes or ballots scanned that favored Biden over Trump, and yet no one's calling it out. So these are the different ways for you to basically get the paper through the system to account for the algorithm that's at work. And how they interplay, it's not, I can't say that it's always the same, because I think there's so many different ways to subvert these systems that you have to be very careful. There's 3 major candidates. The first one is you can subvert the election file that's housed on the tabulator, and you don't even have to have internet access at that point. If you subvert the file, you're off to the races. Alex Halderman's report actually talks about that as being one of the most devastating vulnerabilities. Where I disagree with Halderman is he places tremendous faith in the credibility of the vendors that they would never do this. But when you've got someone like John Paulos, who's the CEO who committed perjury, or Eric Coomer, who is a self-identified member of Antifa before he scrubbed the internet, I think you should scrutinize the vendors very closely before you give them a pass. But if you subvert the election file, you're off to the races. The second vector of attack is to have weak or no credentials and remote access capability. So we know, for instance, with ES&S, there are 30,000 units in circulation today, the DS200s, that have chip modems affixed to motherboards, meaning you can remotely access those machines from anywhere. So the question is, what is it password protected? And uniformly, we're finding out that you've got credentials as weak as a password that is 1234556, and the username's admin. And the vulnerability is catastrophic, meaning I could be anywhere in the continental United States. I could be anywhere in the world. And if I've got those credentials, I can go in there and access your EMS. And if you understand what's on the EMS, there's a tool called Microsoft SQL. And it's just, you can go there and mess with the indexes that have a candidate and a number next to it, switch the numbers, and you can start switching 20,000 votes in seconds. So that's the second vector of attack. The third one is the most pernicious and dangerous, which is after people retrieve those memory sticks, those jump drives from the tabulators, and they upload them into the EMS, which is hooked up to the internet. The Secretary of States are running that data through this integrated internet-connected software that allows them to overwrite the data. So that should not exist. It's illegal, but yet it happens. And there's no regulatory agency, by the way, that has any oversight of this software. So a lot of us are being bludgeoned into thinking that let's just focus on the tabulator. There's all this quote unquote non-voting technology, the e-poll books, the EMS, that isn't regulated. None of it's certified. And so you're talking about the most sacred, important thing that we have, and there are no safeguards that are meaningful in any way to hold these other agencies accountable.
One of the machines, I think it's the Smartmatic machine. I liked your point earlier, though, how you said it's just a logo on there. They're all essentially the same. But the machine, I mean, when you have to adjudicate ballots, it can print onto a ballot. Or the Smartmatic ones in LA County, and you don't even encounter a ballot. You're pushing buttons on it and you get a receipt and hope that, well, it didn't actually change what I put on there. So when after the election, they find warehouses filled with empty ballots, I mean, yeah, who wouldn't think they were using that to fill in the gaps that they needed to meet?
Well, and there's no guarantee that the ballots were from election night. That's the other thing. In Maricopa, for instance, they did that audit, but it was 4 months before they had access to the physical ballots. And they found out that all of the seals were broken. There was no chain of custody. And when they examined the paper, you found out that the vast majority of it did not comply with Arizona law, which required a certain type of weight to the papers. I think it was like 80 ply. The paper was Kinko's Office Max sheet paper. So it violated the law, and there's supposed to be a tag that allows when you submit it through a Dominion tabulator that it will reject it because it's not legitimate paper. Well, wouldn't you know, they found out that detection device within the Dominion tabulator was turned off. So when you actually just do analysis of the paper alone, none of those ballots should have been accepted. And for some reason, the audit there was subverted in many ways. I think the Senate didn't want anyone to succeed, and no one legally challenged in a courtroom the paper. So there's so many problems across, the whole spectrum here. And the fact of the matter is, we know for a fact that those tabulators will gobble up any piece of paper. There's, in fact, a video of a gal in Alabama who asked the vendors, you promised me that this will only accept legitimate Alabama ballots. And they said, we promise you. So she went over and printed the ballot on notebook paper across the street. And she came back and she says, are you sure? And she said, we're sure. The tabulators accepted ballots printed onto notebook paper, and it took every single one of the ballots.
Wow. So you don't even need to be running one of those big companies that prints them. You just do it from your home printer.
Yeah. Well, Runbeck's, I think, part of the scheme. So as long as they've got the numbers and the metrics, they can print ballots on demand, on location, and that's what's happened.
We had, we're running out of time. We had Michael Flynn here a few weeks ago. Kari Lake was also here, and we kind of just asked them, well, heading into 2024, how in your mind are these things remedied? Because, I mean, to a lot of people, it's like, well, what's the point of 2024 until 2020 is fixed? What hope do you see in getting these things fixed? Can they try the mail-in ballot scheme again? I know they're trying to bring COVID back in a lot of places. What do you think heading into 2024?
You have to treat this as a fight against slavery. You've got to have a moral indignation, a righteous indignation, and don't be a purveyor of cynicism. And because if you do that, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. You're basically talking yourself out of saving your country and saving what's left of your voice. So even though I highlight how much the system has been exploited, you have to continue to point out and expose the corruption, and that requires you to be involved. But you also owe it to people to not give them false prescriptions that won't get to it. So I am not a fan of bank the vote or guard the vote. I'm not a fan of early voting because that favors the bad guys. I'm not in favor of anything other than same-day voting, voter ID, no machines. And if you do that, you've got a chance. You will get the right people. You will not have the nation-state level capabilities to remove a generational candidate like Kari Lake or Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is, as long as you use machines and you supply the analytics for the ballot harvesting operations, you will be deprived of once-in-a-lifetime candidates. There's a reason why Kari Lake didn't get sworn in. There's a reason why Trump didn't get sworn in despite all of our enthusiasm. It's because we use machines. So no disrespect to the people out there like Scott Pressler and company. If you're serious about winning and about improving the terrain, we need to be working at the county level to withhold certification of and start getting back to hand counting processes. If it's hard or if it seems impossible, I don't care. The question is, you have to recognize these machines for what they are. And a victory for the bad guys is, let's keep the machines. We'll let you play with voter ID. We'll let you play with this over here. We'll talk about guard the vote or bank the vote. It's nonsense. You will never get who you want as long as these proprietary black boxes chop up and shuffle the will of the people. So it's not, for me, it's not about hope. It's not about, do I think it's worth my time? The fact of the matter, it's the truth. And once you see the fraud that's there, you're duty bound to do something about it until you draw your last breath. And that's the way I wake up. It's not about whether I think or I believe or I hope I'm successful. The fact of the matter is these machines facilitate fraud. And what am I going to do about it before 2024? And what I'm trying to do is encourage millions of Americans to get outraged about this issue, to go back to a semblance of voting that worked for the better part of 200 years, right? There's a magical time called the 1990s where we didn't have this albatross hanging overhead. And what was the common denominator? The poll books were paper. It was a closed system. You signed out for them. You got your ballot. The tabulation was done through spreadsheet through different parties. It was a closed system. The reporting wasn't exported to Seidel or Spain, being back through satellites. It was done at the precinct level. And that's when we had confidence. We had robust confidence in our systems. But ever since the hanging Chad incident in Florida, trust has been obliterated. And you're not going to get that trust back until you can get back to a system that is completely auditable, front, back, what have you. So that would be the good word for me.
Yep. Keep it simple. Makes the fraud difficult. Professor David Clements, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate this interview. Hopefully we can have you back on the show more often. You have been watching the Trumpet Daily. If you'd like to email any comments, you can send those to td@thetrumpet.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.